In these problems, we have some quadratic equations. These are equations where x squared is the highest power of x that we need to solve. And quadratic equations are a little bit different in solving than linear equations, other kinds of equations. There are usually two answers, and I'll show you why. Here we have 81 equals 64 times x squared. I can go ahead and solve this one like I normally would try to solve for x. I would get the x term alone without any coefficient, without any number involved. I'm going to divide by 64 to get that 64 off of this side. So now I've got 81 over 64 equals x squared. Well, what do I do next? I've got x alone, but it's squared. I want to undo the squaring. I can do that by taking the square root. But if I take the square root, I have to take the square root of both sides. When you do that, you're going to get two answers, the positive and the negative. If you think about that, 4 could be 2 times 2, or it could be negative 2 times negative 2. So that's why there are two answers when you take the square root of 4. So square root of 4 could be 2 or negative 2. Same way here. So in this case, we're just going to get x equals a positive or a negative square root of 81 over 64. And the way we deal with the square root here is we just take the square root of the top and the bottom. Square root of 81 is 9. Square root of 64 is 8. So our answers here are positive and negative 9/8. Let's look at the next one. Here we have 9x equals x squared. What I'm going to do is something we often do with quadratics, and that is to get everything on one side and set it equal to 0. So I can do that by subtracting 9x. So I'm going to have 0 equals, and I'm just subtracting 9x here, x squared minus 9x. When we have it in this form, it's easy to do something called factoring. I'm looking for what's the same in both of these terms, and they both contain an x. So I can divide out or factor out an x. So x times x minus 9. And now, what I have here, it doesn't look like it, but what I have is really two equations. Because if these two things multiplied together equals 0, this one either equals 0 or that one equals 0. So what I'm going to do is set each of these factors equal to 0. So x equals 0 and x minus 9 equals 0. And then solve them. Well, this first one's already solved. X does equal 0. This one, I just have to add 9 to both sides, and I get x equals 9. So my two answers there are 0 and 9. Let's try one more. This one's a little bit trickier. We've actually got three terms here. I'm going to start by adding 13x to both sides to get everything all on one side. And then I'm just going to write it in the order that I'm comfortable with. So that would be the negative x squared plus 13x minus 36. So in descending order of powers, the x squared, then the x term, and then the number. And then I'm actually going to multiply everything by negative 1 here, because I like to start with a positive term. I multiply everything on both sides by negative 1, so it's still going to stay the same. 0 times negative 1 is just 0, and the rest of it just flips the signs. This is 13. This is going to make your factoring much easier. So here we have a trinomial to factor. And remember, if you've done this before, the way that works is we're going to have x plus or minus something, x plus or minus something. These are our two factors. And the numbers that go in here are going to multiply out to 36, and they're going to add up to negative 13. And because we've got a negative here, I know one of these is going to be, well, both of them are going to be negative, because they have to multiply out to a positive. And negative times a negative is a positive. So I know my signs. And now we need to think of some factors of 36 that would end up with 13 here if you put them together. Let's see. Well, 9 times 4. So if I had a negative 9 and a negative 4, let's see if that works. Negative 9 times negative 4, that's a positive 36. Negative 9 minus 4 is going to be negative 13. So yeah, that checks out. So those are our two factors. We're going to set both of these equal to 0 and then solve. So x minus 9 equals 0 and x minus 4 equals 0. We just add 9 to both sides here. We just add 4 to both sides here. We get x equals 9 and x equals 4. And those are the two answers. So that's a little bit of work with solving quadratic equations by factoring.